So my intention now is to speak for a little while and then invite Q&A. I want to get a little bit of a sense of who's in the room. With a few questions, you can kind of raise your hand, and if I feel curious about you, I might ask you to say more. How many people here have ever considered or wanted to do something such as going to live in a monastery for a while? Have ever felt the call or the pull, even if you feel like, oh, I would never actually do it? Okay, and online folks, you're welcome to wiggle your fingers at me too. That was over half the room raised their hand to feeling that pull. So that's interesting, good to know. How many of us here identify as, I want to say, social activists or some way in which engagement with the causes and issues of this world is deeply important to you in your life? Could I see some hands? Okay. I'm trying to think if I have any other curiosities about the group. I would love to just hear some really, really brief, like 30-second popcorn style shares from folks in this room about why you come here, why you come to the Sangha, whether it's why you came tonight or why you come in a committed way. If anyone would be willing to share that with me, I would really appreciate it. Just in a sentence or two would help me get a sense of who's here. So if you feel called, I would love to just know why you meditate or why you come here on a Sunday night. Online folks are welcome to pipe up. We'll be able to hear you. So please feel welcome also.
I think to get a sense of like togetherness in the community.
Yeah. Getting a sense of togetherness and community. Beautiful. Thank you. What's your name?
Joel.
Joel. Thank you, Joel. Yeah.
My name is Cecile.
Cecile.
Because there's just so much stuff out there and practicing like this with people, like I think my practice helps me see ways to not perpetuate that. To sort of let that, to not like ripple out more. And I feel grateful for this sangha because I get to see other people doing that too. And it feels affirming and energizing.
And for those who couldn't hear, Cecile was sharing there's so much suffering out there and in here, and being together in Sangha, seeing others and for yourself, kind of letting that stop right here, letting that suffering not ripple out and be perpetuated is quite energizing and nourishing. Thank you. Any other shares popping up? Why do you come? Leah, hi. Leah said, I come for community. Yeah. Oh, wonderful. I really, really appreciate that. Helps me get a little bit of a flavor for us. So what I want to talk about tonight is community. And in particular, I want to share with you what it's been like for me to transplant my life to live full-time in a spiritual community, and the ways that I've been challenged by that and grown through that. So I would like to tell you a little bit about how I came to choose to live full-time in a Buddhist practice community. I started sitting retreats in 2014. My mother died in 2012, and her death was really kind of the catalyst for me getting on the path. So I sat like one retreat a year at IMS for like 7 years or so. I felt drawn to very deep practice right away. I can remember doing walking meditation at IMS saying, oh, I could do this for a very, very long time. That would be a very, very good way to spend my life. But I was in a serious relationship at the time that was relatively new, and going on a long retreat didn't quite sit well with my partner. So I tabled any ideas of kind of going super deep, you know. I was doing other things in life. And then I heard a talk in 2019 that was given by Yanai Postelnik. It was about the climate crisis. It was night 6 of a week-long retreat, and he just gave this super hard-hitting talk about what was happening on the planet. And I came home and I looked at my wife, and I said, this is happening right now, and we're alive right now. And what are we going to do about this with our lives? I started working with Extinction Rebellion, which is a climate activist group here in DC. I worked a little bit with Kristen on some climate stuff. And then in 2020, you know, the pandemic hit, and it sort of felt like a confirmation for me that things really were as bad as I thought they were. I think you guys remember it was kind of apocalyptic. Trump was gassing people off the steps, and it was a very strange time. We were all locked down. So at that time, I decided to go to Maple, which is the name of the place that I live, because it really felt to me like my old life in many ways had died and wasn't coming back, and I was ready to kind of claim something new. And so I want to tell you a little bit about what it's like at this place and the kind of training that I went to do. So the Maple is Monastic Academy, or Maple, the full name is the Monastic Academy for the Preservation of Life on Earth. It's a Buddhist monastic inspired training center that has kind of our intersecting crises at the center of what we're trying to address there. So it's sort of like a monastery, but sort of not. It's like a monastery in the sense that we get up at 4 a.m. each day and spend a couple of hours chanting and meditating, and we do our chores in silence and chant before we eat our meals. And some of us have Dharma names that we've been given. And so in this way, it feels a bit like a monastery. But then in other ways, it's not a monastery. We have retreats that are devoted to like emotional healing, or, you know, dance or indigenous teaching. So it's a little bit more eclectic. It's not just Buddhism. It's co-ed. I'm a married person and I'm allowed to be there. We're not celibate. I mean, we don't have relationships with each other, but so it's in some ways monastic and in some ways quite modern. And most of the people who live there are folks in their 20s and 30s, although there have been residents who are in their 60s and 70s too. We sit a meditation retreat 1 week a month. So 3 weeks out of the month, we're kind of like the inmates running the asylum. The monastics are keeping the center going. We're welcoming guests. We're promoting our programs. We're keeping the place going. And then 1 week a month, we go into silence and sit a retreat. So there is this toggling back and forth between the practice of awakening, classical meditation, and the practice of community, like really being together, and the practice of responsibility, keeping this sort of spiritual center alive. And before I say anything more, I want to be so clear that I know that I sometimes find when I talk about this, it can be a little maybe alienating or daunting or intimidating, because uprooting one's life and just going and doing something like this doesn't always feel so accessible. So I want to be clear that we just need wonderful practitioners such as yourselves in every corner of the world doing this addressing of suffering within ourselves so that it doesn't ripple out further. So I want to say how much I cherish those who choose to practice intensively in a place like this, and then also those of us who are really out on the ground, and that in many ways is a much, much more challenging, a higher challenge level for practice. So maybe some of you have heard this classical teaching from Buddhism where Ananda, the Buddha's attendant, goes up to the Buddha at some point and says, you know, Venerable Sir, isn't spiritual friendship at least half the path? And the Buddha says, no, 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 it's the whole path. So I feel like I've spent a lot of time trying to unpack what that really means, because that's quite a big statement, that spiritual friendship and companionship can be the whole path. But we could hear in folks' responses tonight how important our spiritual friendships are with each other. Another way of understanding this, so my teacher Soryu trained in the Zen tradition in Japan. And at Zen temples, when they've had a huge festival and everybody ate with all these chopsticks, they put the chopsticks in a huge tub and they just shake it. And that's how you clean the chopsticks. You know, just the chopsticks clean each other by rubbing against each other. And this was his teacher's analogy for what it's like to live in spiritual community. That we are the chopsticks and we are just cleaning each other off through uncomfortable processes of friction. Just chopsticks. So sometimes at Maple, when we're really in the shit with each other, it's like, oh, chopsticks. Yep, you're currently cleaning me off and I hate it and I love it. So there's this process of really purifying each other through conflict, through difficulty. And I was thinking about this, and there's something about human beings learning to collaborate together harmoniously that seems just extremely important if we have any hope of hope. And there's a couple quotes I wanted to read from two nonviolent communication facilitators that I really love. One is Mariam Gafforio. She says, whether our species can shift our current trajectory toward global social collapse and mass extinction may in fact depend on our capacity to figure out creative ways to intervene in polarized conflicts, which prevent us from coming together at the level necessary to face high stakes global dilemmas such as climate change. And then her teacher, Miki Kashtan, adds, conflict avoidance anywhere that it happens sustains the status quo. Seeding the world with more people who have capacity to engage with conflict is one key acupuncture intervention that I trust can support our collective capacity to avoid disaster. So in this way, I see this practice of learning how to live together, whether it's in residential community or in a lay community like this one, as so important. And so I invite you to silently reflect on this question for a moment. How have I seen humans struggle to collaborate, impeding the communities and causes that I care about? How have I seen this struggle to be in harmony, impeding the causes or communities that I care about? So I now just want to offer a few stories about the kind of growth opportunities, the kinds of chopstick friction that I've had the opportunity to be exposed to living at Maple. I can remember I had only been living there for about a month or something. I was pretty new, and we had feedback night, which is basically when the whole community gets in the Zendo, the meditation hall, and tells each other something true about how we've been showing up, you know. And I can remember I received two very powerful pieces of feedback. Someone who had just met me went up to me and said, like, I was the cook at the time, I was cooking every day. And they just looked at me and said, you know, I really appreciate the way that you show up in the kitchen and lead, but I'm kind of worried about the state that you get yourself into doing that. I mean, just tears just sprang to my eyes. It was immediately just so true. I knew what they were talking about. I was so tense in the kitchen. I was channeling my mom, tense in the kitchen. And then not 5 minutes later, this beautiful young woman who was becoming my friend gave me another piece of feedback. She said, you know, I notice sometimes it seems like you're in a rush to kind of just blow right past me. You know, like you connect with me, but you connect with me for like 3 seconds and then you're gone. Just, you know, crashing over me. And I immediately realized that I was being seen very clearly by these people that I was living with, and they were able to see things about me that I could not see in myself. And they possessed a part of my truth that I just wanted to know. And that I needed to know how I was impacting others, again, if I'm going to be part of contributing to this collective harmony. So the reflection question that I have here for you all is, what are the superpowers that I have that other people can see in me that I might have trouble seeing? Superpowers do I have that others can see that I can't? What are maybe the blind spots that I have that others might hold the keys to? What am I afraid to ask or find out about myself? Another dimension of this living in community that I would love to share with you is, of course, getting triggered by other people. It's like we don't get to choose our family, and we also don't always get to choose who we're in spiritual community with. And people are present in the field who we find quite difficult. I heard an analogy from Zen that like when the teacher is going to market, like choosing his students or her students like pieces of fruit, they should choose the most bruised and unattractive fruits, that these should be the people who come to the monastery. And in a way, this is because sometimes I've noticed in our community, the people who show up as difficult for me become my absolute greatest teachers. I personally struggle, for instance, with people who are like loud or obstinate or doing things that like I would, you know, I like to kind of be the good girl and like the A student or whatever. And the people who are making a ruckus, I tend to feel triggered by. And it's like, oh, why is that? Right? Like, what is it? There's some rejected part of myself that this person is currently embodying, and I need to really take a look at that. So there's some way in which having these people around has just helped me learn so much. And so the reflection question I would offer to you now is, who is the most difficult person in my life right now? And what are they teaching me about the ways that I need to grow? The last piece about living in community that I want to share with you is this sense of seeing each other as sacred. A friend was saying that one of the things that can shift through deep meditation practice is that we stop blocking the presence of divinity in our everyday life. We stop, something falls away that would normally block us from being able to see each other as beautiful and sacred and beloved, and we actually begin to be able to see each other in that way. And it's so beautiful and amazing. We recently did I don't know how many people are familiar with the practice of circling. It's like an interpersonal meditation practice. We recently did a week-long intensive of circling at Maple, and I really began to perceive some of my friends as like almost gods in a way. Just the beauty and the inspiration that they offered me was so amazing. And so the final reflection question that I have for you is, how is sacredness presenting itself right now through the people in my life? And are there any divine people, places, or images that I might be overlooking? So I think in closing, I just want to mirror back to each of you the profound power that you have in the lives of those around you. I'm currently just sitting here feeling deeply touched, thinking about the people like Kristen or Devin, who I've walked my path with in DC, and also some of the people that I now live with and train with, and just how important those spiritual friendships are. So I want to close by thanking you so much for your practice, this practice of spiritual friendship, to whatever extent you're currently engaging in it. And thank you so much for your kind attention, for listening. And got a little bit of time for questions and answers, about 15 minutes, less time than I intended, but floor is open. So if you have a question about meditation, about Maple, about anything I talked about, or a reflection, I welcome that. Oh yeah, great, yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about the circling practice and any like resources on that if we're interested in it?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so yeah, I'll hold this right while we're passing it around. Okay. So circling is something that we practice at Maple as kind of a complement to seated meditation. Like if we think about sitting alone on a cushion, kind of working with our own system. It's like one kind of practice, but then in circling, it's a relatively new form in the world of authentic relating, which in my experience is like a little bit bigger on the West Coast than it is here. That's just been my experience, but it involves connecting very deeply to what's true for you in the present moment and sharing it. So it has a little bit of a group therapy vibe, but it's kind of much more than that. And it can go quite deep. It can kind of become more contemplative and more about the emergence of collective intelligence as opposed to like psychological healing or like emotional healing work. It can kind of do both. And in terms of resources, there's a platform called Circle Anywhere, or you can actually learn circling online. And it's quite big, including among very devoted circlers who've done a lot of in-person work. So yeah, and Leah, it sounds like you might be familiar. Yeah. Do you want to take this?
Yeah, so I just wanted to add that I do a lot of work on or circling on Circle Anywhere, and they do have a free intro session for 2 hours every Saturday. So I recommend that if you're interested. And I'm also happy to talk more about it with anyone.
Yay, that's so cool. I want to talk to you about circling. That's great. I'm a new convert to circling. Like we do it about once a week at Maple, and I was like, this is okay. This practice it's all right. And then we did a week-long intensive. I was completely blown away by what it did for the community. So yeah, the high dosage definitely made a big difference. Other questions or reflections? And online folks, you're welcome to pipe up also. Oh, I see something in the chat. Let me look and see if that's a question. No. Oh yeah, okay, let me pass the mic to you. Thanks.
Lauren, thanks. Yeah. I know that the work we do out in the world is like so related to the work that we do like in meditation and like inner self. And I was just wondering how you mentioned like going to school of social work and like how that was a part of like your path and like informed your work and you as a person and where you are now.
Yeah, so it's interesting because it was practicing the Dharma that led me to social work. My first career as a performing musician. And like working so closely with the heart and mind in meditation, I became really enamored of like wanting to work more closely with the heart and mind of humans. And so I did the MSW here at Catholic in Brooklyn. And it was amazing. So amazing. And it was what an amazing like venue to kind of bring forth your Dharma practice and working with folks, whether you're like, serving people experiencing homelessness or you're doing one-on-one therapy work. Was so beautiful. And I think what ended up leading me away, I practiced as a psychotherapist for a few years, and what I still practice a little bit. And what ended up leading me away from that was this sense that I wanted to build. I really didn't trust the world that I was sending my clients back out into. And I had this deep longing for them to have better places to go, better like institutions that could kind of hold them and their journeys. I think the individualism of psychotherapy began to kind of like grate on me as an intervention. And so, yeah, I now feel pretty committed to building alternative institutions. And it brings me back to the circling actually, because I've seen that there are ways that we can all be in the same space healing each other, or that the present moment and the truth actually can be healing us all simultaneously, as opposed to us in these kind of one-on-one, like, don't get me wrong, I still go to therapy when I need to, and it's wonderful, but I'm feeling deeply called to kind of a little bit more of a more collective forms. But yeah, that's a great question. Does that answer kind of what you were curious about? Yeah, there's so many different ways that your Dharma can kind of like come forth. And I'm so grateful to those people that still do that one-on-one work in those rooms, because it's really important also. Yeah. Yeah, please. Thank you so much.
wondering about the function of the visits the visitors that you host, like what you try to get through to them at Maple.
Do you want to come visit?
Yes.
What's your name?
Chuck.
Chuck. Okay. I'm subtly getting Chuck to try to come visit the monastery. Yeah, so it's super cool. We have different kinds of guest programs. So it can always be a little bit intimidating to visit any monastery because you're like, there's so many rules and what am I going to do? But let's see. So a few of the different forms that visits can take, you can come sit a retreat with us. And so that's sort of like sitting an IMCW retreat where you come, but it's quite different because it's this really close sangha. And then guests are really important and like really warmly welcomed. And we kind of become a slightly bigger sangha. Like we might have just 5 guests join us for a retreat so that it's like 35 folks on retreat. And in that case, it's really about it's about like any Dharma community, it's about offering the practice to you. Our teacher Soryu is really, really remarkable, particularly in one-on-one interviews. So it's like just a precious opportunity to like share our teacher with anyone who wants to come study with him. But then there's also opportunities to come, like if you work remotely, you could be a co-working guest there and live there for a month, 2 months, 3, and be like part of the community. So you're also getting up at 4 with us, doing the morning hours, and then you're also doing the evening practice period with us, but then you can work and take naps as necessary during the day. So I think I have become close friends with like so many guests that have passed through Maple. And for many people, it's a glimpse of another way of living that's quite impactful, but also a chance to kind of like go deep and reflect for yourself. And yeah, do you have anything in particular that you're curious about or feel called towards in this regard?
I mean, just about Maple.
Yeah.
I guess like maybe a little more about the environmental.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Well, the other thing that feels important to say is that there's a part of Maple that's kind of nascent or just being born. That's like a social impact hub. So there's a vision for deep contemplative practice being connected to like social impact ventures. For example, somebody at Maple is developing is working in cryptocurrency around like a cryptocurrency that would reward like pro-social actions or and it's called Project Kelvin because it has to do with the temperature of the earth. So there's sort of this desire to be linked with people who are out in the world working on change projects and kind of linking that to like the deep resource of contemplative wisdom. Our teacher is like really, really big on climate issues, but I feel like that's something about Maple that's like really wants to be born, but isn't quite yet born. So folks who are in those spaces, there's a real desire to kind of link up. Another big area that we're already connected to is AI safety, artificial intelligence safety research. There's someone who we actually just got a multi-year grant where our teacher will be leading retreats for AI safety researchers because that's a really difficult area to work in. Those people are confronting some like really scary existential threats to our society, those who work on AI safety. So yeah, that hopefully that just gives you like a little bit of a sense, but some people come who just like work in tech and want to be at the monastery, and others are like deeply wanting to build something that's impactful and wise. Yeah, checking the time. Yeah, other questions or reflections? Oh no, my account was signed in from another device. Huh. Oh, actually, it looks like I'm still here, though. I still see our friends on Zoom, so I think everything's fine. Oh, maybe so. Okay, cool. Yeah, other questions or reflections or... Yeah, Kristen, you want to take the mic?
So 2 things, maybe you can say something about Daniel and his podcast that might be helpful for people to hear about, because it's a way to get a sense for Maple. And then maybe you can share, even in your guided meditation, you talked about letting go. And so there's something about the idea of the monastic life that is a renunciation. So can you speak to the renunciate aspect of what you're doing?
So the first thing Kristen mentioned is the Emerge podcast, which if you don't listen to it, has been made for several years by one of the most senior monastics at Maple, my friend. He goes by Daniel Thorson or Ryushin. So if you want to check out a podcast that's from was like most of the episodes were recorded from Maple, you can check that out. And that's how I heard about the place. And that's why I ultimately came, is at the end of every episode, he was like, so if this seems appealing to you, you should come for a visit. And I was like, I would never do that. I would never go live at such a place. That's weird. And then at some point it didn't sound weird to me anymore. So yeah, the Emerge podcast is a wonderful resource. And actually, I think I'm going to be on the next episode, maybe. Yeah, I'm excited. I think so. Anyway, letting go. It's so hard. It's great. I absolutely love it. Well, I mean, and so like, again, our teacher Soryu, he's not everybody's cup of tea. He's quite fiery and intense and sometimes yells and says things that make you feel uncomfortable. And one of the things he talks about is the way that the Dharma can be offered in the West is we try to get as much as we can while giving up as little as possible. It's like, oh. But what the flip side of that is that as we make sacrifices, we receive so much in return. So it's like the letting go part is so hard, but then like once you actually let go, it's so fantastic. Yeah. I was with one of my teachers yesterday, and he said something like, reality will not yield to unreality. Truth will not be giving in to untruth. And I think that there's some part of your being that when it feels deeply called to truth, you're kind of willing to let go of a lot. So yeah, in your question, I feel this encouragement of just like deeply staying connected to one's truth and trusting that the letting go will kind of follow that, because it seems like that's what we want more than anything. At least that's what I want more than anything. Thank you for that. Okay, I think we're at the time that you're going to make announcements and wrap us up. So I was going to try to make a sign-up sheet so that folks could join my mailing list, but I have not successfully done that. But do you send out like a follow-up email to the sangha? I do, exactly. It's just ellenmcsweeney.net, and maybe I'll harass Kristen and get her to send you guys a little bit of follow-up in case you want to just basically have my contact info, but I'm super easily Googleable. So like if you want to come to Maple, you have questions about the training, or you want to follow up on anything that I shared, I would be so delighted to be in contact with you. Awesome. Okay. Thank you so much. And thank you to those online. Nice to be with you. Yeah.